So Will Scott, the writer of this book, the 1992 to 1997 Kevin Keegan's Legacy, The Entertainers. Fantastic book, this, Will. A really good read. I've billed it on our show as the must-buy book for Christmas. 320 plus pages, a lot of unseen photographs in there as well. And it is, as we build it, the inside story of how Kevin Keegan transformed Newcastle United from a relegation outfit on the verge of sinking into the third tier of English football into Premier League title contenders and an unforgettable return to European football, as told by the men who will always be remembered as the Entertainers. And there we have the long list of people who've contributed to the book. So, Will, welcome along to NUFC Matters. And where did the idea come from, Will?
Well, it was your idea, Steve, wasn't it?
It was.
I can't take credit for that. It was good to be working with you again. You reached out at the beginning of this year, asked if I would do it, and I didn't really take much persuading. To be fair, it's something very close to my heart. That period of time was very special for everybody who was a Newcastle fan at that time. Kevin Keegan put together such a wonderful side. I mean, it was easy on the eye. It was the beautiful game, wasn't it? So yeah, it was an easy decision to make once you kind of put the question, would I be interested to do? So yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was quite because I was doing most of it in part time. It was quite stressful. I haven't had much of a social life, but it was all worth it in the end. The guys who spoke, I mean, there's 30, I don't know, 35, fascinating. Everybody's got a good tale to tell. There's some old stories, some new, some exclusive stories. I think you're right when you say it is this year's book. I think it'll be a great stocking filler, and it'll provide a memento of that special time period, I guess. So yeah, I hope people enjoy reading it as much as I did, kind of putting it together with you.
It was an interesting process, wasn't it? Because my little black book with that particular era of players is well known. We've done a lot of events. We've got a big event, of course, which we're going to double up as the book launch for this. The Entertainers reuniting at the Tyne Theatre in January next year, of course. But this process was an interesting one, mainly because I did a lot of the interviews and got a chance to speak to the lads and ask the questions that sometimes I don't get a chance to ask when I've got them on the podcast or haven't had a chance to ask them face to face in talkings. And it was a great process. We obviously we're putting the interviews up on the channel over the course of throughout December. But you as well had interviewed a few people, and let's start with one person who is very close to our heart, and that's Pavel Srníček. Pavel, of course, was somebody who I got to know quite well as a player, and then as he left the club, we became quite close through his mutual friend Dennis Martin, and the rest of the guys, Tom, Lorenzo. They were a big part of Pavel's life, and we almost became like a close bunch, group of friends who, used to go and eat our Chinese buffets at notorious buffet places in the town and talk about Newcastle United until we're full. But it was a great relationship, and that intro that you had to Pav was special because you decided to come on board with us at Mojo and work on his particular book, and that was great, wasn't it? To be able to, I guess, to revisit the stuff that you'd done with Pavel as a Geordie.
Definitely. I mean, there's not a day that goes by where I don't think of him, and there's a little bit of sadness every time I think, but a lot of joy as well that we had putting it together. He really was a prince amongst men, a humble guy. And you're mentioning his friends there, Dennis, Lorenzo, and Tom, for example. They were, and yourself as well, a close, tight-knit kind of group. Of course, he had his friends at Newcastle, the ex-pros, but every time he come back, he would just see the same guys, wouldn't he? It just shows how humble he was. We had I certainly, he looked after me very well when I went over to Prague to stay with him for a month, going through that process of, the interviewing, and he'd pick me up at lunchtime and I'd do a bit more interviewing, and then I'd do some transcribing, and then he'd come pick me up at dinner time, and then we'd go back to his place and he'd cook me dinner. I mean, how many former Premier League stars would you have, cooking dinner and waiting on your hand and foot? He's just an amazing guy. He loved Newcastle. It really did break his heart to leave. And a lot of the guys, a lot of the readers, when they pick up the book, they'll hear from other players as well as Pav, talk about the guy who kind of split Keegan's entertainers up. I mean, I don't want to start a war against Kenny Dalglish, but it was a really sad period after Kevin had been. I think Paul Ferris actually kind of sums it up perfectly when Kevin left, and he described it like, he says it was more like a death, and I think he hit that nail on the head, really, because it did feel like a death when Kevin quit and moved on. So yeah, that was sad. But Pavel, he would have done anything to have finished living in Newcastle, for the rest of his life. He wanted to come back as a coach. It didn't happen at the time. I remember Glenn brought him back for a season as cover. Again, we spoke about that in quite a lot of detail, and Pavel as a Geordie. And then Big Sam came and he wouldn't kind of give Pav his dream, to come back and work, which was sad. Yeah, I still can't believe he's not here. It is a heartbreaking story, really, when you think about it. I mean, he was probably the fittest man I've ever seen in my life. He was absolutely ripped. His clothes, it was as if they were like spray painted on. There wasn't an ounce of fat. He ate well. He didn't drink. He enjoyed the odd glass of red wine. And he didn't fulfill one of his dreams. I don't know if you remember, Steve, that one of his dreams was to open a restaurant called Pavel's, and he just wanted to do five starters, 5 main courses, 5 desserts, 5 bottles of red, 5 bottles of white, which is a shame, really. Yeah, he's a big miss, mate. Very big.
Huge miss, mate, and a fantastic book. You can still get that on Kindle if anybody wants a copy of Pavel as a Geordie. Wonderful insight into his time on Tyneside. We did move on to do another book called, it was with another Geordie legend, Jigsaw, as he was affectionately known, Lee Clark. And again, that book was a labour of love for you, I guess, wasn't it? Because black and white, no grey areas. We expected big things with it. We got big things with it because Lee's such a great lad, Geordie lad through and through, but a grafter as well, and he probably helped with distribution more than anybody else has ever helped a small publisher because of all the clubs he played for or managed. He was great at getting in and putting us in touch with the right people, and it went far and wide. But yeah, that was another good book, wasn't it? To be involved.
I loved it. Again, I loved the process. It was quite different. Again, when I got with Lee, he's quite guarded at first, and then we had a couple of nights where we socialised or had a couple of glasses of red, and then he opened up a bit more, and he's just a funny guy, And I'm probably going to preempt one of your earlier questions, and all the guys in the book, they talk of their reasons of why Newcastle kind of threw away that 12-point lead. And I'm with Lee on this one. And again, I love Kevin to death. He is God in my eyes, and the way even Pedro says, he is God. I don't want to be too negative with Kevin, but I do think that bringing in David Batty to replace Lee Clark had a massive effect. I just think that Lee was a forward-thinking player, more looking to be positive on the ball. And I'm not saying that David wasn't. He just wasn't as direct or as positive as Clarkie was on the ball, And I think that upset the rhythm more than anything else, Batty would you're quite happy to break up the play and just give it to somebody else. But Lee, he had great vision. He had 2 great feet. He could play it short, he could play it long, he could play it over the top. He had a wealth of talent in front of him, with David on the left, who was doing his wing wizardry. You had Keith on the right, who was, more traditional kind of right winger, who had great blistering pace. And then you had Rob Lee in front of him, who was a box-to-box. It was kind of their roles that kind of reversed when Kevin decided to convert Lee from a box-to-box player himself into a holding midfield player. But yeah, I really enjoyed putting black and white, no grey areas together. He's a super lad, Lee. Always got great crack. Always got great stories. It was a laugh a minute, putting it together. Yeah, a really great time doing that book.
Yeah, great stuff. And of course, a lot of those stories are regurgitated, but similar stories used in this, and we've got some new stuff as well, obviously from Lee for this particular book. So if you want it, buy the book, Amazon, NewcastleLegends.com, or Backpage shops. And I think from today as well, you'll be able to go into Waterstones and place your order. The Metro Centre, WH Smith's, also has them as well. Another one I was always interested in is a man who Kevin Keegan described, and most people described, as probably his most important signing of that era, and that was Brian Kilcline. Now, we didn't unfortunately get round to doing a book with Brian. There was lots of talk about it. You managed to get a few hours of interviews with Brian over the course of time, but sadly, for one reason or another, the book didn't come out. But the stories are still there, which we've managed to use in this particular book, and there's some great stuff from Brian.
Yeah, he is. He's another one, a very articulate guy. When you first meet the guy, you're kind of quaking in your shoes because he's just such an intimidating. Well, he looks intimidating, but then when he talks, he's quite softly spoken, and he's really a gentle giant. I mean, I wouldn't want to cross him. We had a couple of. The last time I saw Brian, we both got quite drunk in Emmerdale Farm, not Emmerdale Farm. Last of the Summer Wine Country, that's where he lives. And we both ended up, he had his head over a toilet, and when I was on my way home, I was puking out the side of the car. So yeah, that's another tale. But yeah, Brian had a galvanizing effect, didn't he? He was the first guy that Kevin brought in, if you like, to pull the team together. We had a lot of talented youngsters in the side, but we didn't really have any leaders. And Killer was a leader, a leader of men, respected, an FA Cup winning captain. Always lovely to hear. What always surprised me was he always said that his 2 years in Newcastle were the best of his career, and I'd be like, well, Killer, you won the FA Cup with Coventry. He went, yeah. He didn't really enjoy his time at Coventry. And even though he didn't play very often at Newcastle, it was just having him there, And when I spoke to Kevin about Killer, he did say he had a role in mind on the staff, as a coach. But Killer wanted to play, he still had a few years in him, and he knew that he was never going to get that at Newcastle. He's a very humble guy as well. He kind of could see the players that Kevin was bringing in, and he's. I just love the fact he doesn't really rate himself as a footballer. He's always got nice things to say about other footballers. He says some great things about Steve Howe, how he was progressing as a young centre half. Giving him advice. Kevin Scott, he was a big fan of Kevin. I mean, if it wasn't for Killer, as Kevin says, I mean, there might not have been any entertainers, there wouldn't have been any kind of marquee signings, there wouldn't have been an Alan Shearer, there wouldn't have been, Peter Beardsley wouldn't have come back, there wouldn't have been a Rob Lee or a Tino Asprilla. That would never have happened without Killer. So yeah, he's a fundamental part of the entertainers. Laid the foundations, if you like. Without Killer, who knows? I mean, there would have been no Kevin. and we probably would have went into Division 3, and who knows what would have happened. But yeah, Killer, a really important part, or a really important piece of Kevin's jigsaw to start it off,
On the front of the book, we've obviously got a whole host of photographs of the different legends, but the guy on the top right, alongside Kevin Keegan, Sir John Hall, is the man who, of course, made it all happen. He came on board to fight the previous owners to try and get the family silver out of the family silver clutches of Gordon McKeag, but it became a real challenge. He launched a share issue which fans didn't buy into, but eventually the Magpie Group, with the help of Malcolm Dix and co, managed to win the power battle, and the rebuild began. But Sir John Hall's input is superb in this book as well, and gives you a real feel for that. And the late great Malcolm Dix, of course, a good friend of mine. Great to see him featured in this, and I know for a fact this would have given him a real buzz to see his name in print in such a way.
Well, first of all, Steve, I wish I'd gotten to know Malcolm better. So after the interview that you did with him, I was blown away. I mean, I know you were very close to him. I did meet Malcolm a couple of times, and it's sad that he's passed on now. But he, again, we talk about catalysts and we talk about Sir John Hall. I mean, without Malcolm Dix, I mean, he's an interesting character in Newcastle's history for a start, because his grandfather was, he was one of the original shareholders when the East End and the West End came together. And then those shares were passed down to Malcolm's father, and then Malcolm's father died in I think it was 1973, I think he said. And then he kind of inherited the shares, and he was the original kind of enemy within. I mean, it's really quite. I'm blown away by Malcolm. But Sir John came on and did great things after. Malcolm formed the Magpie Group, but without Malcolm, there wouldn't have been no Sir John Hall. So Malcolm was, again, I mean, these guys were businessmen, and Malcolm, he kind of had this like Trotskyite fervor, like the rebel with a cause, to bring down the regime from within, if you like, And then, he couldn't go any further, he'd almost bankrupted himself, him and the guys in the Magpie Group. And that's when he went and knocked on Sir John's porter cabin door on a rainy day in Dunstan to see if he would come on board. And as we both know, Sir John wasn't keen at first. And Sir John did say that he was disappointed that, the Newcastle fans didn't take up the share issue. But I mean, there needs to be some context for that. I think a lot of the fans would have loved to, bought into Sir John's share vision. But there was kind of an economic crisis at the time. The early 90s, we just had another bust after the boom with the Tory government, and a lot of ordinary Newcastle United fans, they just didn't have the money to take up that issue, But I think what happened was it was for the best, because Sir John came in, and as he says, you become a bit of a dictator. I don't think that would have happened had it been. Mr. John said he wanted democratize the club, but then you got too many fingers and pies. And I think Sir John kind of took leadership, and he drove it through, and he was behind, finding the revenue, and it was a team effort, I mean, it wasn't. I mean, Kevin came in, and Kevin was good at his thing, and Sir John was good at his thing, delegating, raising funds, expanding the ground, but mainly finding the money for Kevin to sign all of these wonderful players that he brought in. And wow, what an eye for a player Kevin did have.
I love
even Sir John. Sorry to break in there, Steve. Sir John even says, he said the happiest 5 years of his life were the Keegan years, I mean, his trips with the away fans on trains, walking through city centres with the fans, it's like it's gone down in Geordie folklore, Sir John, a massive part. We couldn't have done it. We couldn't have done it without Sir John. We couldn't have done it without Malcolm, and we couldn't have done it without Kevin. I mean, nobody would have come. Kevin just had this magnetism, didn't he?
Yeah, I love the fact as well that Sir John knew when to quit. You know, he knew that he couldn't compete with the Russian money that was coming in at Chelsea and decided to go. Unfortunately, as we all know in history, he sold it to the wrong man. But that's a different book for a different day, Bill.
I think so. And that would be a great book.
The other person that really fascinated me, who wasn't on the playing side, was Derek Fazackerley. I got to know Derek quite well. Once the tragic news about Pavel had hit, and we've kept in touch. And very personal, quiet man. Doesn't really do a great deal of interviews. Very careful about what he says about anybody, and you've got to respect that. But what we got out of him for this book was rather special.
Yeah, another humble guy. He doesn't like to blow his own trumpet. I think he'll be surprised when he reads the book because, there's several things going back to this, why Newcastle never won any silverware, why they threw that 12-point lead away. And there's a lot of players, there's not one reason, there is several. And one of the reasons was Derek had moved on, the pull of his hometown club. Now, us as Newcastle fans know that, the pull of Newcastle for Alan Shearer, the pull for other Geordies, they only want to play for the hometown club. So Derek was torn, he was torn that, Newcastle was so close within, to win the Premier League, and he left halfway through that season. So, yeah, I think Derek, he had I don't want to blame Faz for going, because the pull of his hometown club was just too much, And he did say he had kind of mixed feelings when Newcastle went down to Blackburn that fateful evening, where a Geordie kindly undone us with a couple of goals, and the league started slipping away from us. But yeah, Derek was an important cog as well, in kind of helping shape the side, as Kevin was looking to be on the front foot, and Faz made sure that the defence knew their roles, and even the midfield players knew their roles. I mean, we got criticised quite a bit for not being able to defend, which is a fallacy, really. It's only because people see Newcastle as they were more like gung ho, and that wasn't the case. I mean, we had proper defenders. You can't tell me that Darren Peacock wasn't a great defender. Of course he was. Barry Venison, a great defender. John Beresford, what a fullback. Probably one of the best uncapped left backs ever to play in the Premier League. Kevin Scott was a good defender, killer, a great defender. And wow, everybody talks about Philippe Albert for his goals and the fact that he had a wand of a left foot, and he could score the odd worldie, but he was a good defender as well. Keegan first saw him in the World Cup in '94, and he marked Marco van Basten at the game. So, Newcastle could defend, and Faz played a big role in making sure that everybody knew their job.
A lot of people said when they saw the list of names on the back to me that, Mick Quinn, one of the entertainers, he wasn't one of the entertainers, but, there are people who were at the club in 92, 93 season who maybe weren't as, used as much as other players, but they were still there. They were still part of it. And that was one of the things I really wanted to do, Will, was to try and get the full story, because, with every player that gets a game every week, there are players who have to sit on the bench, and Mick Quinn was one of them.
I'm glad you got Mick on board, to be fair, because he offers a great insight. I mean, there's a few players who just had a short time at the club in the Keegan years, and they're all very complimentary about Kevin and how they got moved on. Quinny, I think at the end of the day, he just wasn't Kevin's type of player, and we all know Quinny was a great finisher, one of the best, He wasn't the quickest, but over that 10 yards he was. And in the book, and he talks about that last game that he said was the best game of his career, that game against Portsmouth, where he got a brace. He had a third one ruled out. That was unfairly ruled out. It was the best game he ever played. He says everything about that, his touch, his all-round game, leading the line, getting in behind defenders, coming short, spinning off, all of that. But he still has fond memories, and he is. I mean, he's a Liverpool fan first and foremost, but Newcastle's his second team, and he wanted us to win the league just as much as anybody. And he loved his time at Newcastle. I think he was sad. He didn't want to go, obviously. Supporters loved him. But there's other players as well. Malcolm Allen was another one. He felt as if it was his destiny. And I find that it's a great line. He did. He was part of that FA Youth Cup final in 1985 where Gaza and Joe Allen played. Kevin Scott played as well. Those three. Geordie legends, if you like. And he says, I felt as if I had a connection with Newcastle, which is bizarre given he's an East End lad, But he came in again. He did a great job, and he was just so unlucky. I was looking back at some of the footage of his brief time, and he had a great touch, and he had a great eye for goal, and a great vision, great passer. I'd have loved to have seen him, get over that injury and play more. It's the same with Gavin Peacock. He was destined to come to Newcastle. I mean, the Newcastle supporting family from South Shields. His grandfather was a big Newcastle fan. His father obviously was a Charlton legend. The first substitute in Football League history, and I remember interviewing Keith, his father, a few years ago, and he said, Newcastle were kind of his second love. But Gavin Peacock, he thought it was his destiny to come and play for Newcastle. Had a Super Mag T-shirt. Always spent his holidays in the northeast when he was at school. And sadly, he left for reasons and for non-football reasons, which was really a shame. But they all kind of got it, They all kind of got Keegan's vision. They came and they did their bits, and then they got helped out of the club nicely in a way, if you like. And none of them are bitter. None of them are bitter who were moved on by Kevin. They just could see what Kevin was trying to do, and he was just, come along for the ride. If you're good enough, you'll stay. If you're not, you'll be moved on. People call Kevin cutthroat, but he was very methodical in what he wanted to do and his vision for the club. But people like Mickey Quinn, I mean, it is a shame. But Gavin and David Kelly dovetailed beautifully together. Me personally, I would have loved to see Quinny stop a little bit longer, seen the season out anyway. But he tells a couple of good stories in the book. I'm sure the readers will enjoy.
Yeah, certainly does. And of course, moving from Mickey Quinn, one number 9 at Newcastle, to Andrew Cole, Les Ferdinand, temporarily number 9, of course, and then Alan Shearer, who came in at the back end of the entertainers. 3 great strikers and three people who had great stories to tell about Kevin Keegan in this era.
Yeah, I mean, wow. You're talking about 3 of the greatest Premier League, three of the greatest strikers in Premier League history. I mean, where do you start? Andy Cole, I'm not sure if I want to give too much away, but he talks about the transfer. He talks about the clashes he had with Kevin. I think with Kevin, it was my way or the highway. Andy, he's quite I think he's quite a complex character. He says he isn't, but I think he is. And maybe he just didn't warm to Kevin's style of management. I mean, he scored a lot of goals, and Kevin focused the team all around Andy to the, that he didn't have to move from the centre to the centre circle. You'll find some good. There's a few of the guys, they've got, I don't want to spoil it for people who read the book, but there's a few of the guys talk about their reasons why they think Andy went. One, that he might have been tapped up. Andy denies this, of course. Nobody knows whether he was a Man United fan at the beginning anyway, and whether he always had his eye on that. We don't know. Les are, people regularly talk about which player were you upset about leaving, and for me, big Les, I just couldn't believe that, you know, Kenny would let him go. You know, he was another one who bought into Kevin's vision. He was a battering ram. He was perfect foil. I mean, the team was set up perfectly for Big Les. You know, you had two wingers, and then you had Bob Lee supporting him. I mean, who wouldn't like to play with Peter Beardsley? I mean, he just makes players great, doesn't he? Look at what he did for Lineker in England. Just a little magician, you know. So it must have been a dream for Les to have those guys providing all of those assists for him. And then when Alan came in as well, again, I mean, I think there was a lot of people sceptical. Terry Venables, you know, one of the best coaches in the game at the time, he said that those two couldn't play together, but it worked, you know. And they spent one season together, and both of them had lengthy spells out injured. You just wonder, you know, if one of them had managed to stay fit, Newcastle could have won the title that year, you know. I remember a few years ago, I got a DVD of Alan Shearer's goals, 260. 260 Newcastle goals. And halfway through, I was like, hang on, these guys, it's the same guys providing the assists. So I rewound it back, being a bit of an anorak myself. I wanted to see who got the most assists. And it was jointly Ron Robert and Nobby Solano. But the second after those, the one with the most assists for Alan Shearer was Les Ferdinand. He had 8 assists in that season that they played together. And they were all quite similar. A set piece or a corner would come in, Les would win the first ball, Alan would get the second ball. It was lethal. It was one of the closest, one of the only times I came close to tears than seeing Les go. But yeah, an absolute gentleman. He spoke fondly about his time. He never wanted to leave. He wanted to spend the rest of his career at Newcastle, and it's just a shame that, you know, the guy who came in after Kevin moved him on when he didn't need to be fair.
Yeah. You were a journalist in the Northeast during this wonderful era. You know, your opinion, Bill. Why do you think Newcastle didn't win the league? Is it because, you know, a coach left in the guise of Derek Fazackerley? Is it because, you know, Lee Clark was moved out and David Batty was brought in? Peter Beardsley was moved position as well in that. Is it a tactical change? Was it, as Peter Beardsley has often said, that didn't have the experience in the team, who, you know, players who'd won anything? You know, there wasn't the players in there. There was a bit of naivety there. Where do you fall on this? What's your feeling?
Well, there's something in everything that you've just said there, Steve. You know, there's a lot of times where I thought Kevin was upsetting the balance for trying to fit square pegs in round holes. But the main one, as I said earlier, was moving Clark out of the side and bringing in David Batty, which ironically, Batty was probably our best player in the run-in. But he just, for me, upset the balance. I think, again, Kevin was trying to get Tino in too quickly. And as you read the book, Tino even says he hadn't played for 6 months, so he wasn't really match fit. I think Tino should have been used as an impact sub, the way he was at that game in Middlesbrough when he came on. We just had so many wonderful players who could do one-off things, and Tino was one of them. So that was like a game at Middlesbrough ideal, where, okay, all of our flair players had kind of run out of ideas, if you like, and Tino came in and he provided his unpredictability and a spark, you know. So yeah, and even Keith Gillespie talks about it. He got injured as well, and he lost a little bit of form. He came out the side. Kevin was just trying to keep his best players in, I guess. Peter was moved out to the right-hand side. That didn't work. Peter was never a right winger or a right-sided midfield player. He weaved his magic in the middle of the park. Faz moving on, yeah, I'm sure that had something to do with it as well. But I think if Kevin had just kept the same side, I think he looked at and me and Lee spoke about this when we're doing Lee's book. If you remember, we went down to Man City and it was a goals fest. We drew 3s each, and it looked as if we were wide open. And I think Kevin probably looked at that game and felt as if we needed to shore up the middle of the park. Interestingly, when I did Pav's book, Pav said, had we Barry Venison in the side, playing in the centre of the park, we would never have lost it. His leadership and his will to win would have soared us over the line, which is an interesting idea because we didn't have enough winners. Again, Peter was touching on something that's true. We didn't have many winners. He'd won leagues. David Batty had won a league. But when you look around the side, there wasn't many others. I mean, man for man, Newcastle were a far better side than Manchester United. Far better individually. But Man United had been there, done it. They knew how to get over the line. They knew how to win ugly, whereas we didn't know how to win ugly. We wanted to play the beautiful game. But yeah, I think Lee Clark, for me, that was the biggest thing. I think Lee should have stopped in the middle of the park. His vision, his passion ability, he was a very underrated player. He sacrificed his own game, if you like, for the good of the team. So, I mean, that just shows you what a lad he was as well. And I always thought that we were a better side with Lee, and he just seemed to make the side ticked. It moved the ball quicker, and he was kind of the catalyst for that, I believe. So yeah, mainly Lee Clark for me, and Tino is an impact player. Had Kevin done that, I'm sure we would have won something.
Great stuff. Yeah, Tino, I mean, fascinating. I mean, I think the problem with Tino is, Bill, we've always, like most journalists over the 90s, have to rely on the interpreter. You're never quite sure what Tino is saying, are you?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, maybe this is the time that we should have said in the book, because some of the fans might read the book and think, oh my God, I didn't know Tino could speak such wonderful English. But we need to give a shout out to Tino's interpreter,
Carlos.
A big shout out to Carlos, who helped us and transcribe all of Tino's tales, which are hilarious. He was a fantastic character, a massive part of the Entertainers. Again, it was short-lived. The guy, again, who took over from Kevin, moved all these players on, and he turned us, from title outsiders to treading mid-table, which was a real shame. But yeah, Tino's got a couple of good tales to sell, and I'm sure the fans will enjoy reading them.
And a little forward at the start of the book from Kevin himself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Kevin was great. It was all about about Killer, there wouldn't have been any Kevin Keegan. I mean, if Kevin hadn't kept Newcastle up, he would have gone. There would have been no Terry Mack. There would have been no Rob Lee. There would have been no Entertainers. There would have been no Alan Shearer. Would Sir John have even taken? Would he even take it on, or would he just cut his losses and just left it? It's all kind of what if history, But as Kevin said, he said, and it took a lot of persuading. The board weren't convinced. Again, there wasn't a lot of money to play with. Kevin was, he was adamant that he had to bring in Killer to steady the ship, to pull everybody together, to give them a chance. And as he said, he says he may not play, in the future, and further down the line, he'll not play at all. But we need players like Killer to help, like plug the gaps, if you like, to make us move on to the next level. So yeah, Kevin, I don't want to spoil it too much, because there's a killer end, and no pun intended. There's a killer line at the end, which I'm sure everybody will have a chuckle. Typical Kevin quip.
Yeah, Typical Kevin Quip, it's a good way to describe it. Peter Beardsley, of course, recognised in the book as well, a wonderful, wonderful player, not just once but twice at Newcastle, and a legend, it has to be said, and a man who certainly helped Andy Cole, although Peter is very humble, often says it was down to Scott Sellers if you watch the goals, but Peter played a huge part in helping Andy Cole develop as the player that he ended up becoming, I guess, for Manchester United, but still had that wonderful season where he broke Hughie Gallagher's record.
Yeah, it would have been interesting to see how Coley would have coped without a Peter Beardsley, but he certainly, I don't know, he gave him I think without Peter Beardsley, he wouldn't have gotten the move to Man United. Peter was just on a different level everybody else, and it's quite funny that, you know, Kevin loved him that much. If he gave a bad pass, it was never Peter's fault. It was always because people weren't intelligent enough to read what Peter was doing. But he did seem to be on a different level to anybody else. He could just see things that mere mortals couldn't see, you know. And he talks a little bit about the process with Andy, you know, how he spoke to him, and Andy asked, you know, what do you want from me? And Peter told him, you know, if the ball comes to me, get on your bike and I'll find you. And 9 times out of 10 he did, didn't he? I mean, as well as Peter, I mean, he helped himself to. I mean, there weren't tap-ins, were there? I mean, he was scoring Messi goals before Messi was around. Absolute worldies. Left foot, right foot. Even got the odd header, didn't he? If you remember the game at Sunderland. But yeah, I mean, a deserved title. And as Peter says in the book, you know, Kevin asked him to come on board and do what he did when he came to Newcastle toward the end of his career in 1982. And yeah, Pedro, for some, he just seemed to get better with age, you know, like a fine wine, I guess. Keith Gillespie talks about it as well, you know. He says that players would just in training, they would stand and be in awe of, you know, how he wouldn't take his foot off the pedal. He was still giving 100%, and he was wondering, you know, if he's this good now, how good was he in his pomp in his mid to late 20s, you know? Yeah, a truly wonderful player and a truly wonderful partnership with him and Coley. But then, I mean, he had the same type of relationship with Les. I don't think it really mattered who Peter played with. He would have made a star out of me and you, Steve. Me and you could have played up front with Peter, and we would have scored goals.
I just want to finish off on the player that was described as Kevin Keegan's pound for pound best ever signing, and that's Rob Lee. Rob Lee, General Lee, whatever nickname you want to give him, a great insight from him, and again, somebody who you know, an adopted Geordie. Yeah,
he was. And again, another player who just seemed to get better and better. I mean, the better the player that Kevin brought in, Rob seemed to kind of rise to the occasion. Fantastic football brain. I mean, the story's gone down in folklore about, you know, how, you know, Middlesbrough was Newcastle was closer to London than Middlesbrough, so you could get home easier, and it's grown legs. I mean, it's a great tale, and the fact that Rob was never going to come to Newcastle. He'd even told Terry Mack when Terry Mack had phoned him. He had a trip around Middlesbrough, and I love Rob's got a really great dry sense of humour. And how he just, I'm not going up there. It's too grim up north, you know. I mean, north to him was like just north of Watford Gap, and he admits that. But he became an adopted Geordie. He loved Newcastle. He loved the support, and it was the best part of his career, wasn't it? Again, he was a complete player. He had 2 good feet. He had a couple of little tricks, a great eye for goal. It didn't matter where you played him. An absolute wonderful player. And I don't think he would have come to Newcastle, actually. I don't think a lot of these players would have come to Newcastle if it wasn't for Kevin. Kevin just had that pull, you know. I think it helped that Kevin was Rob's hero, like a lot of Newcastle players, you know. Mickey Quinn, although they didn't see eye to eye, as player and manager, and Scott Sellers as well. I think Scott Sellers said that Kevin was a god, was a footballing god when he was growing up, and when we were growing up, he was to me. Him and Supermac were my first two heroes. And when Kevin signed for Newcastle as a player, I was just like, wow. But yeah, Rob Lee, and he went on to be a blue chip player for Bobby Robson as well later on. The legs had slowed down a little bit, and he tells a really funny story. I was going to cut it out, but I thought, no, I've got to keep this in because it was about Bobby Robson. The book's mainly about Kevin Keegan's entertainers, but I'm not going to spoil it here. But I think the fans will enjoy when he goes asking Bobby for a new contract. Very funny, and Bobby was very funny as well. But Rob Player, what a player! Yeah, deservedly legendary stuff. A legendary player, an adopted magpie, like a lot of them, like Pav and those who stayed around, and a top bloke as well,
So that's great. The Entertainers, 1992 to 1997. Kevin Keegan's Legacy, written by Will Scott. You can buy that book on Amazon. You can buy it on our website, newcastlelegends.com. You can buy it at the Backpage shops in the Northeast. You can get it at WH Smith's at the Metro Centre, or you can get it at potentially Waterstones now. We just need to walk into Waterstones and ask them to order it. We've managed to get that supplied via Gardeners. So a big thank you to Gardeners for doing that as well. The book's priced at $18.99. And if you want to get a copy signed, get yourself along to the Entertainers event in January. That's going to be a little bit of a book launch for us. And hopefully, all being well, Will be over to join us and spend a little bit of time with the lads. And yeah, looking forward to that. What's next then, Will? Are you having a bit of time off before you get over here? Are you chomping at the bit to write a new book?
That all depends on you. See what you're going to offer me, Steve.
Great stuff, mate. Lovely to team up with you again. Thank you. And I know you're not very up for doing these kind of things, but I managed to convert 15-minute interview into 45 minutes. So well done. You've nearly done a full podcast, mate. We will finish now and we'll play out with the ads. Take care, Will.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Lovely to talk to you again.
And you. Bye-bye.
See you later.
A big thanks to all our sponsors, Skips and Bins. You can find them at their website, skipsandbins.com. Say hello to low-cost waste disposal with pay-as-you-go and contract waste management. Thanks to Mr. Vicky's Sauces, handmade in Cumbria. Their website is mrvickies.co.uk. Email them info@mrvickies.co.uk or telephone 01768 210 102. Thanks to our fanzine sponsor, United Group Travel. Congratulations to them on their Travel and Tourism Award 2024. 2-crew driver and courier, local family company, 3-star plus quality hotels, no interchanges. All excursions included. Find them at their website www.unitedgrouptravel.com. Email beverly.ugtl@gmail.com. Telephone 01670 632 460 or mobile 0791 666 4174. Just £30 per person deposit. There are no strangers on our tours, just friends you haven't met yet. Thanks to Media Arts for all the help with the technical side of things. And don't forget, we are also available as a podcast on iTunes and Spotify and other podcast providers. If you get the time, please hit the subscribe button. It does do us a big favour. Hit the like button, which is the thumb under the video. That helps the channel grow. And click share to share to your other social medias. You can also hit the join button and become a member. Some dates for your diary. In aid of Newcastle Cat and Dog Shelter, the Long Sands play the Cluny. That takes place on Saturday, January the 4th, 2025. With support from Lilac Lane and the Chris Norris Band. Tickets pre-sale are £15 from newcastlelegends.com or from the venue direct. Peter Beardsley will be doing a talk-in at the Tyneside Irish Centre. That takes place on the 10th of January. Tickets are £30. VIP tickets are £60 and you can get them from newcastlelegends.com. An evening with the entertainers takes place at the Tyne Theatre and Opera House in Newcastle on the 24th of January. Kevin Scott, Steve Watson, Steve Howie, John Beresford, Rule Fox, Peter Beardsley, Rob Lee, Keith Gillespie, Liam O'Brien, Darren Peacock, Paul Bracewell, Lee Clark and Killer Kilcline are all going to be there with Gibbo, and you can get your tickets from the box office 0191 243 1171 or the website tynetheatreandoperahouse.uk. Lee Clark will be at the Gateshead Leisure Centre, that is on the 31st of January, and tickets available from the Leisure Centre 0191 250 5066. Les Ferdinand will be at the Newcastle O2 City Hall the 6th of April 2025. That is a 12 o'clock start until 4 p.m. in the afternoon. Tickets available from ticketmaster.co.uk. And Will Scott's book on the entertainers is out now. £18.99, over 380 pages, and a lot of unseen photographs. You can buy that book now from newcastlelegends.com. And we do have some fanzines remaining. If you want to buy an NUFC Matters fanzine, issue 1 is still available, again from newcastlelegends.com. And please take your time to flip onto our other channel, The Word on Blake 7. Please hit the subscribe button and help that channel grow.